In this episode of Making Markets, we have Matt Johnson, President and CEO of Silicon Labs. We'll be talking about the state of the market, scaling IoT, and the impact that red hot AI has on that part of the company's business. We'll also dig in a little bit into Matt Johnson's role in the semiconductor industry as chair of the SIA. We will cover this and so much more. You're tuned in to Making Markets.
This is the Making Markets podcast, brought to you by the Futurum Group. We bring you top executives from the world's most exciting technology companies, bridging the gap between strategy, markets, innovation, and the companies featured on the show. The Making Markets podcast is for information and entertainment purposes only. Please do not take anything reflected in this show as investment advice. Now, your host, CEO of the Futurum Group, Daniel Newman.
Matt Johnson, President and CEO, Silicon Labs. Welcome back to Making Markets.
Thanks, Daniel. How's it going?
It's great to have you. It's been a minute, but it hasn't been too long. I think I spoke to you maybe after one of your most recent quarters. Always great to have you here. I know you're in a quiet period, so going to have a little different conversation with you. Promise I'll stay away from that. But here on Making Markets, we love to bring CEOs of top companies across the technology sphere to look at the shape of the market, technology, economics, and so many more things. And I think that'd be a great place to start with you. We've had a yo-yo of conversations, and the semiconductor industry is kind of the boom-bust industry of all boom-bust industries. We spoke a year ago. It was boom times. This was boom for IoT. It was boom for Silicon Labs, but there was a bit of a feeling that maybe there was going to be a hangover post-pandemic, interest rates, inflation, lots of things going on. So where are we at? How are you seeing the market right now?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting time out there in the market for all of us. I think, not trivializing any of this, but I think, everyone knows and sees what's going on with the overall economy. I think that no one knows exactly how that's going to play out. When it gets into the semi space, as you pointed out, 100%, we have, just a fascinating industry of boom bust and kind of swinging the pendulum too far in either end of the cycles around this. And I think that's what we're seeing now. So, if you step back and look at our space, I don't see any of the fundamentals changing around the importance of semiconductors, the need for semiconductors. If anything, the world's more aware of the criticality of what semiconductors do. We like to say, imagine the world with and without semiconductors, and then it becomes very real very quickly how elemental they are to the future. So those fundamentals haven't changed. And within IoT, I don't see those fundamentals having changed either. So if you step back, the need for connected devices, digitized devices at the edge, hasn't changed at all. So I think what we're going through is, this cycle, which is, a function of the overall macro environment and the semi cycle, but the fundamentals that underpin all this haven't changed. And honestly, it's probably the most exciting time I think most of us have seen in semis, in IoT as well, for a long time.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned at the end, kind of diving into IoT, Matt, because we all know that AI and generative AI have they've sucked a lot of the wind out of everything. And yeah. I'm going to make you, we're going to talk about that here in a little bit, but sure. It's kind of easy to skip by. I've noticed a little bit companies that were cloud centric are talking about AI, companies that were edge centric are talking about AI, companies that were, automotive centric are talking about AI, software centric AI. And my point is, I think there's a little bit of and I take a little bit of issue as an analyst that's been calling AI for a long time that a lot of what we're seeing isn't new. Yes, there are some new capabilities and large language models have been democratized somewhat, but it's not all new. And it's like, yes, I get it. Marketecture, we need to market, we need to tell stories, we need to align with what people care about. We need to keep the buzz high, but companies are sort of straying from their core competencies in some ways to make sure they build this message around that topic. And so we'll talk about this with you, but I'm glad that you said IoT, because it would have been really easy for you to say semiconductors and AI, but you leaned into your core competency. You were all in on IoT, made this proclamation a couple years back. Talk a little bit about that. Like, what's it going to take now to get that kind of back on the rails? It's not like it ever really went off, but it hasn't been as in focus. And You are all in on it. What's it take to build the industry, to get IoT back on the rails, and of course, to make sure that you're at Silicon Labs, keep that billion-dollar business that you've worked so hard to build?
Yeah, absolutely. And we can always talk about the AI stuff later. As I
We
said
will.
before, I don't you can't there's no discussion where we can avoid it right now. It's in the hype
No, no
cycle and,
way.
and
No way.
feeding frenzy. So I know we'll get there. On the IoT piece, it's a good question and a good point that, as I said earlier, we don't see the fundamentals having changed. And if you step back and look at it, the things we think that are needed for the industry to continue to scale and grow really haven't fundamentally changed at all. And the good news for us is they're one and the same for what the industry needs and what our company needs to do. So to be specific, we really see a need for continued progress around, for lack of a better term, user experience, developer experience. And those things get thrown around all the time. But if you think about what needs to happen, developers need to be able to do a lot more efficiently if we're really going to scale and deploy this market at the level and scale that we know is going to happen and needs to happen, which is, not just tens of billions of devices, but hundreds of billions of devices. And, think about what we're talking about when you start talking about those types of numbers. So that piece is critical. And it's also about the user experience as well. If these devices are not deploying, being set up, and being reliable and working well, we're not going to deploy at the scale we want and need. So that user experience, developer experience, the industry's made progress. Things like Matter will help. Things like Amazon Sidewalk will help. All the things that we're investing in are making it, mass market wireless connectivity and digitization of the edge happen easier and faster every cycle. But we still need to make material progress there, I think, to realize the full potential. So that's one. Another one is security. And it's not as sexy as AI to talk about, but it is honestly just as important. If devices are not trusted, this is not going to happen. So making sure that the fundamentals are there, that their devices are trusted, the connections are trusted, and it can deploy at scale is critical, and that hasn't changed. And the industry is making progress, but we still have a long ways to go there as well. And maybe just one other to point out that I think probably doesn't get as much attention and appreciation is the ability to support multiple protocols from a wireless perspective. People kind of have a mindset or tendency to think of a connected device at the edge, especially at the extreme edge, really only needing one wireless protocol for its connection to the network and to the cloud. That is the case oftentimes, but increasingly, multiple wireless connections protocols are needed moving forward. And if you think about it, it makes sense intuitively, right? Think of a handset. How many wireless technologies are there, whether it's 5G, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, etc., because they all bring something to the table and all serve a purpose. If you have a device that sits on the edge of the network and you might want it to use sub-gig for one connection, you could use that to talk to Amazon Sidewalk, you could use it to talk to many protocols, but then Bluetooth to talk to your phone, Wi-Fi to talk to your network and cloud. Very quickly, you can see that the need for those to be synthesized, work well together, be cost effective, be power effective, because what we're talking about in a lot of these cases is solutions that last 5 years, 10 years, not hours, days, or weeks. That's something that the industry has to become better at, and that's something that we've been focused on literally for almost a decade now. So that's a critical thing that has to happen as well for lack of a better term, full scale deployment.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think you hit it kind of on the reliability, dependability, the scale out. The data is going to play a huge role as well. We know that ambient data, connected environments, both in the enterprise, industrial complex, across homes, consumers, is really what makes the IoT so important. It's about intelligence. It's not really about things. It's about what can these things enable us to do. And so as you think about that, then, I do tend to think a lot about, well, this does feed into where we were before, so as much as I try to desperately avoid it, Matt, the AI story comes to bear, because in the beginning, some of that is smart and the intelligence was about things like automation, right? You automate the factory to make smarter robots, you automate the home to control. And so these were the early eras of intelligent processes being created using ambient and IoT and edge data.
Absolutely. No.
So what's the Silicon Labs story on AI?
Sure. So yeah, maybe first of all, I do believe we're, in whatever you want to call it, the most interesting place of the hype cycle around, specifically generative AI and large language models. But I do think that, for us, nothing's changed at a fundamental level. I think, big picture, I'll get to generative AI, but our focus on AI hasn't changed, right? As you pointed out in the beginning, we've been focused on AI, and that hasn't changed. What we primarily focus on is really supporting and bringing AI to the edge of the network where we focus, and that's really particularly machine learning. It's not generative AI, and we've built this capability into our devices, and what we see as a long-term trend is the continuing need for more compute and specifically inference at the edge, and that'll continue to happen over time, right? And we see the applications. I mean, think of it this way: it allows applications to be more useful, more valuable, and provide more useful insights for their intended purpose. It's happening, and it will continue to happen. When it comes to the and that's been our focus and strategy all along. When you talk about the questions we're getting a lot lately, well, what does generative AI mean for the IoT? And you and I have touched on this in the past. I do think that net it's a it's a positive, right? And not trying to get into, yeah, we expect a short-term pop on demand because of this. I think this is a long-term play. Absolutely. That can help, right? You can be much faster and more efficient in terms of support, generating sample code, development code for our customers. That's real, and that's useful. And for sure, we're leaning in there, but we're not alone in that. I think you'll see that across the board in the industry. So, will it help our industry move faster? Yes. Will it help us move more efficiently? Yes. But it doesn't change the fundamental strategy of the company in terms of the way we're deploying in devices, and we've always been trying to bring inference to the edge and doing it more efficiently. And to be clear, this is very different type of compute than we're talking about in other applications like handset or PC or automotive. As I said before, we're talking devices that can last years on the edge with a watch battery, and being able to run inference in that way is a completely different skill and game, but it's happening and it's real. So hopefully that helps a little bit in terms of framing. Fundamentals haven't changed, but net this is good for our industry, not bad.
Yeah, I think that there is a bit of a loop that's going on that's not necessarily all productive. The continuation of aggregation of data, of devices that sense, that intelligence that can be inferenced in real time on low power, high volume devices, like not everything is a sophisticated supercomputer in your pocket or in the data center. There are so many devices that sense, and so many devices that sense that can provide value through data, that can create chains of events or provide useful data and insights that can add value to every industry, really, from consumer to industrial, like I sort of said in the beginning, Matt. And one of the things I've admired about what you've been building at Silicon Labs is that you really have leaned in and focused on an area that people can truly sort of say you and a very small subset of companies have well-defined, specialized this capability. You're not trying to say all of a sudden that you're building out, competitive chips with NVIDIA. You're saying
No,
this is we've
no.
got our moat, and we know what we're good
Yes.
at, and we're going to lean into what we're good at, and we're going to continue to build a significant practice, business, and capability that's going to scale as connected things scale. So that's really
Yeah.
exciting. Congratulations on that. Speaking of congratulations, you have been named the SIA, Semiconductor Industry Association, a pretty important um,
Oh, yeah.
pillar in the business. You are now the chair. I'm kind of curious amongst giants, and of course, a year of a billion, a year of taking the chair seat. What's the year been like in that role? What are you kind of focused on as the chair of the Semiconductor Industry Association?
Sure. So yeah, interesting experience for sure. Honestly, an honoring one and a humbling one as well. The SIA has an amazing history in our industry in the U.S. So it's great to be part of that. Fascinating going to D.C. and seeing how Washington is thinking about our industry, and like we said in the beginning, the awareness of our industry, its importance and what it does, and how it underpins effectively economies and society is stronger and the highest that it's ever been. So that's been an amazing experience. And just to add to it, this is the U.S. SIA. But
Yeah.
I was just recently in South Korea representing the U.S. delegation as all the global SIAs got together, and to get to see that on the global stage is also a fascinating experience. But to answer your question, I think probably a couple of things. Chips has gotten a ton of attention, and we're in an interesting phase right now where we've gone through the let's call it the hype cycle, where we're doing it and everyone is aware of it. Now we've moved into the mode of, okay, how are we going to deploy this and do it in the best way, and what's that going to look like? And so that's the phase we're in. So that's getting a lot of attention in the SIA right now. And then the other piece is just, with the overall, geopolitical environment and what's going on, you can't deny that the semiconductor industry is so intertwined and coupled globally. It is
Yeah,
truly a global
truly.
industry. And there's this desire, in some places for that to be less coupled. So to see how that'll play out, and that will have implications in terms of investment, cost structures. Honestly, it could, there's components of that are inflationary when we're trying to reduce inflation. So getting people to understand that and do it in a way that is actually good for the world, good for the industry, good for every country is a balancing act. And getting to be in the middle of a lot of those discussions has been it's like I said, humbling. Trying to do my best. And to be clear, I'm not in this alone. I have an amazing team of CEOs and industry leaders right there with me all the time. So it's awesome.
No, that's fantastic. It's interesting because you mentioned a lot of the supply chain. Kind of you're implying, how the supply chain works globally. How you know um, there's a few different manufacturers of equipment and different foundry fab options, and then there's of course assembly, and around the world all these things tie together. And Matt, I got a PhD in the last 2 years. I did 50 television appearances to talk about the supply chain, and I knew about this stuff deeply, but I spent more time in policy, regulatory, and supply
Right.
chain than I ever expected as an industry high tech research CEO and analyst. And it was really prophetic to learn about this stuff. And obviously I saw you shaking hands with presidents, diplomats, politicians. Pretty cool to have the chance to
Yeah.
participate and meet you know, these influencers among influencers that are really making decisions and setting policy that's changing the world. Now, I will invite you in advance to come back because I would love to talk about this with you a little bit more through the lens of policy, because I think there's a lot of thoughtful debate, not disagreement, but thoughtful debate about things like how do we create a resilient supply chain with manufacturing in multiple parts of the globe without making it feel like microaggressions against certain
That's right.
parts of the world. How do we share intellectual property that's going to be for the good of humanity without creating national security defense issues? How do you maintain technology leadership here amongst the allied nations while still democratizing that. So these things are things that we want to make them very black and white. Politicians, unfortunately, love to make these things
Right.
very partisan. But I look at this stuff as for humanity, what we're doing in this industry matters. And so what you're doing with the SIA really matters as well.
Uh, yeah, I'd love to talk about it more. And it touches on something that's so important. It's with this type of issue, it's not easy because it's not easy. There's truth all around. There's not this, black and white, this is right and this is wrong. There are geopolitical considerations. There are, cost and fundamental industry issues and constraints, right? And these things are big, slow moving ships that take time to move. And it is interesting. This is one of the few things that does have bipartisan support in Washington is around the importance of our industry and how do we navigate this. So it's fascinating. It's, I think, ultimately a good thing. Sometimes if we're honest about it, there's help that's not helpful. But I think for people to understand the industry and its importance is a win overall. And I think our industry is been quietly helping the world advance, and for people to be more aware of that and the implications and the challenges and complexities is going to be a net win. But we got to go through it, and the education cycle and process takes time.
Yeah, help that's not helpful. I like that. I think I heard that at home recently. Matt Johnson, President and CEO, Silicon Labs, thank you so much for joining me once again here on Making Markets.
Great talking to you, Daniel. Thanks much.
Thank you for tuning in to Making Markets. Enjoy what you heard? Please subscribe to get every episode on your favorite podcast platform. You can also watch us on the web at futurumresearch.com/makingmarkets. Until next time, this is Making Markets, your essential show for market news, analysis, and commentary on today's most innovative tech companies.